don't want to move very fast. You want to try to keep something between you and your target. My kind of role in nature, I'm a hunter and a trapper.
A surprising discovery inside Tom Oar's remote Montana cabin has sent fans and longtime followers into a frenzy. For years, the legendary mountain men star has lived far from civilization, crafting his own tools, clothing, and shelter with the kind of skill that most people only read about in history books. But what was found inside his cabin just moments ago has raised new questions about his health, his future, and how much longer he can continue living off-grid.
We try to make as much money off of everything that we kill. I live off the land, try to keep something.
The discovery is shocking, not just for what it reveals about his private life, but for what it suggests about the man himself. Stay tuned as we reveal what was found inside Tom Oar's cabin. Who is Tom Oar? For decades, Tom Oar has been regarded as one of the last true frontiersmen in America. A man who didn't just talk about living off the land, but mastered every piece of it. Long before he became a fan favorite on Mountain Men, Tom had already built a life defined by self-reliance. Born in Illinois and raised around rodeo culture, he spent years as a competitive bronc rider before the wilderness ultimately became his permanent home. In the remote Yaak Valley of Montana, Tom and his wife Nancy carved out a lifestyle that most people consider impossible. No neighbors for miles, no modern conveniences, no easy access to town, just dense forest, harsh winters, and the kind of isolation that shapes a person's character. Viewers admired Tom not only for his craftsmanship, but for his calm, steady way of navigating challenges that would overwhelm almost anyone else. His cabin, hand-built and constantly refined over the years, became a symbol of that world. Everything inside it, every tool, pelt, blade, and piece of wood, told part of his story. That's why the recent discovery is so unsettling. To understand why what was found inside his cabin matters, you first have to understand who Tom Oar is and how much of his life is woven into that small, isolated space. In the weeks leading up to the discovery inside Tom Oar's cabin, a series of subtle but worrying signs began to circulate among those who had followed his life closely. The cabin in the wilderness. Deep in the Yaak Valley of Montana, Tom Oar's cabin stands quietly among dense forests and rugged terrain. Its location is deliberate, far from roads, towns, and casual visitors. Tom and his wife, Nancy, have chosen a life of isolation, relying on skill, preparation, and the natural environment to sustain themselves. Privacy and independence have always been central to his lifestyle, and the cabin reflects that philosophy. Constructed entirely by hand, the cabin is simple but functional. Its walls, roof, and foundation are built to withstand Montana's harsh winters, using materials sourced from the surrounding forests. Inside, every element serves a purpose. A wood-burning stove provides heat. Work surfaces are arranged for leatherworking and trap maintenance, and shelving holds tools and supplies in neat, accessible order. There is no excess. Each item reflects careful planning and efficiency. The workshop area illustrates the heart of Tom's daily life. Bundles of tanned hides, hand tools, and partially completed projects are organized methodically. Implements for trap maintenance, cordage, hooks, and stakes sit ready for seasonal use. These details reveal a life built around preparation. Each tool and material is stored for immediate use, supporting routines that ensure survival and productivity in the wilderness. Even the living spaces reflect thoughtfulness and adaptation. A folded blanket rests near a stool by the stove, and basic supplies are stored efficiently. The arrangement shows attention to comfort as well as function, demonstrating how the cabin supports both work and daily life. Nothing in the cabin is decorative, everything has a purpose. Tom's choice of location supports this lifestyle. Proximity to forests and rivers allows access to wildlife for trapping, as well as wood and other natural resources. Being far from towns and roads ensures independence and control over his environment. Seasonal planning is evident in the organization of supplies and project areas, reflecting a life structured around natural cycles rather than modern schedules. The cabin itself communicates the principles of Tom's life. Its quiet order, well-maintained tools, and carefully arranged materials tell the story of decades spent living intentionally in the wilderness. There is no dramatic discovery. The significance lies in observing a space that has been shaped entirely by skill, discipline, and self-sufficiency. For anyone seeking to understand Tom Oar, the cabin is both home and record. It demonstrates how he and Nancy sustain a fully off-grid life and why they have chosen to remain in the remote Yak Valley. Each shelf, each workspace, and each tool reflects a life designed for independence, survival, and connection to the natural environment. Whatever had happened, it was clear from the moment anyone stepped onto Tom's land that they were about to find something out of the ordinary. None of them, however, expected what they were truly walking into. Entering the cabin. The approach to Tom Oar's cabin had always been a quiet one, but on this particular day, the silence carried a different weight. As the group drew closer, the familiar outline of the small hand-built structure emerged through the trees. Tom's cabin had never been polished or decorative. It was functional, sturdy, and shaped entirely by the demands of the land. But even from a distance, something felt off. The front door, normally secured with a simple latch Tom crafted himself, was slightly ajar. That alone was enough to raise an alarm. The wooden steps creaked under the weight of the first visitor, their sound echoing unnaturally through the stillness. Usually, Tom kept the porch swept clean of leaves and debris, a small habit that helped keep the forest from reclaiming the entrance. This time, the boards were covered, untouched for days. Spiderwebs clung to the corners of the doorway, thin and fresh, clear signs that no one had passed through recently. When the door opens, a sharp rush of cold air spilled out. The cabin was darker than expected, even for daytime. Tom always kept the shutters open to let the natural light in, but they were sealed tight now, turning the interior into a dim, shadowed space. As their eyes adjusted, the first thing they noticed was the smell. It wasn't unpleasant, but it carried a stale heaviness, the scent of a place that hadn't been lived in for several days, maybe longer. The living area, usually organized with precision, looked frozen in time. Tom's tools, which he kept meticulously arranged, were still hanging on the walls, each one in its proper place. A handmade cup sat on the small wooden table, half filled with water that had begun to gather dust. His coat, thick, weathered, and essential for the harsh mountain cold, hung untouched on its hook near the door. These weren't signs of someone preparing to step out for a moment. They suggested someone who had left abruptly, or not at all. The silence felt heavy, almost expectant, as if the cabin itself was holding its breath. Every corner they passed raised more questions. Everything appeared intact, yet something was undeniably wrong. The deeper they moved into the small, dimly lit space, the more it became clear that they were on the brink of discovering something far beyond what they anticipated. The first major discovery. When they stepped farther into the cabin, the first thing that stood out was how familiar everything felt to anyone who had followed Tom Oar's life. The place wasn't staged, polished, or curated for visitors. It looked exactly the way people had seen it for years on television: practical, worn, and built for working hands, not for show. That alone created an unsettling contrast. This was a cabin meant to be lived in daily, not left sitting in silence. The front room carried the strongest signs of Tom's routine. Along one wall, several finished leather goods hung neatly: simple pouches, belts, and a few pieces of soft, tanned hide. These were not props or set dressing. This was the work Tom had done for decades, using traditional methods that required hours of manual effort. Anyone familiar with his craftsmanship could recognize the texture of brain-tanned buckskin and the distinctive way he cut and laced the leather. All of it was consistent with how he worked and lived. A long wooden table stood pushed against the far window. This was not a modern workstation. It was made from rough boards, visibly handmade, its surface darkened from years of scraping hides, rubbing oils, and shaping leather. A pair of well-used tools lay on it: a fleshing knife with its curved edge dulled by use, and a wooden stretching frame for softening hides. These weren't placed for display. They looked as if someone had used them recently and set them down without thinking. Nothing here felt abandoned. But nothing indicated Tom was just outside either. The center of the cabin held the small living area he and Nancy had built their lives around. A wood-burning stove stood in the corner, blackened from regular use. It wasn't warm, but a small pile of split logs nearby showed someone had prepared fuel. Tom often split his firewood in advance. That habit had been mentioned in interviews. The sight of it wasn't surprising. What unsettled people was how normal everything looked. The walls were lined with small shelves holding the kinds of tools and supplies anyone who lives off-grid would recognize: sharpening stones, jars of preserved food, coils of rope, simple metal utensils, and a tin lantern. None of these items were unusual. They were exactly what Tom used in his daily life. But seeing them untouched, with no indication of when he had last reached for them, created the first quiet moment of tension. The back of the cabin held the area where he processed pelts during trapping season. This was the part most viewers of Mountain Men would instantly recognize. A wooden beam overhead held several drying racks, and though they were empty, the setup was unmistakably his. The floor beneath was worn smooth from years of scraping, cleaning, and stretching animal hides by hand. A few bundles of cordage hung nearby, thin strips of leather that he used to secure pelts and shape them as they dried. These were small details, but they were real, consistent with decades of his documented craft. On a side shelf, several unopened tins of trapping lures sat in a neat row. These were standard supplies for someone who still maintained trap lines. The labels were faded but intact. None of them appeared spilled or disturbed. In fact, nothing looked out of place. The silence in the cabin wasn't dramatic, just strange. This was a man known for constant motion, someone who rarely wasted daylight. Yet the space held no indication of recent activity. No half-tanned hide hung from the frame. No tools were mid-use. No coffee pot sat on the stove. Everything was clean, ordered, and resting. That was the detail that kept raising questions. Tom Oar was not careless. He and Nancy had built their life around preparedness. Even interviews described how he organized his supplies, checked his equipment, and kept his workspace functional year-round. For the cabin to look this undisturbed did not suggest emergency or chaos. If anything, it suggested the opposite. Someone had paused their routine intentionally. The small bedroom at the end of the cabin was simple, just as he had always kept it. A narrow bed, a heavy blanket, and a wooden chest sat against the wall. Nothing dramatic, nothing broken, nothing signaling distress. Yet there was also no bedding pulled back. no clothing laid out, no signs that someone had slept there recently. Like the rest of the cabin, it looked like a place waiting for its owner to return, but giving no hint about when that return would be. The most striking part of the entire walkthrough was how faithfully everything reflected the man people had come to know. Simple, practical, and untouched by modern clutter. Every detail lined up with years of publicly known information about how Tom lived. And because of that, the room's stillness carried a different kind of weight. Not exaggerated, not mysterious, just undeniably out of rhythm with the man's lifelong routine. By the time they stepped back into the center of the cabin, one fact had become clear. Nothing here explained why Tom was gone. Everything inside the cabin matched the life he was known to lead, except for the one thing that mattered most. Second discovery. Moving from the main workspace, they entered the part of the cabin that served as Tom Oar's personal study and storage area. Unlike the workshop, this space was quieter, less active, and clearly arranged for organization rather than labor. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies and personal items that reflected the routines of someone living entirely off-grid. There were no dramatic surprises. Everything was functional, but the details offered insight into a life carefully maintained over decades. One of the first things that drew attention was a small collection of notebooks. Each one was bound in plain leather or sturdy cardboard, showing wear from frequent use. They contained notes on projects, including measurements and material lists consistent with Tom's known craftsmanship. Some included sketches for leather goods or moccasins, showing the precision with which he approached his work. These were not journals in the sense of private diaries, but records of a man tracking his own workflow and ensuring continuity in his self-sufficient lifestyle. Among the notebooks were a few letters, tied together with string. These were clearly personal correspondence, addressed to friends, family, or business contacts. None suggested secrets or dramatic events. Instead, they demonstrated Tom's careful attention to communication despite his isolated life. Many letters were dated weeks or months prior and remained unsent or pending delivery. This reflects a well-documented aspect of his life. While remote, he still maintained contact with the outside world when necessary, prioritizing self-reliance but not complete isolation. In addition to the notebooks and letters, a small assortment of tools and supplies indicated ongoing organization and maintenance. There were containers of sewing needles, bundles of thread, leather scraps sorted by size, and small boxes holding buckles, ties, and other hardware. Nothing here was unusual for a craftsman of his type, but the care with which each item was stored highlighted a structured approach to his work. Every item had its place, minimizing the risk of waste or disruption. A wooden rack near the corner held a series of thin, sharpened sticks and small metal implements. These were part of the routine maintenance of his traps, as confirmed in interviews with him during Mountain Men. They were clean and in order, suggesting that he kept his trapping equipment ready for use, even when not actively out in the field. Nearby, a few empty pelts hung for inspection, reinforcing the steady rhythm of his work. A small calendar, pinned to the wall, marked seasonal tasks. Certain months were noted for preparing hides, repairing gear, or maintaining tools. Nothing dramatic appeared, just careful, forward-looking organization that reflected a life lived in preparation for seasonal cycles and the challenges of the wilderness. This attention to detail aligns with what is publicly known about Tom. Decades of experience have taught him that survival and productivity in the Yak Valley depend on preparation and consistency. Even the smallest items reinforced this impression. A set of carefully labeled jars contained tanned leather scraps, preserving material for later projects. A small tin held spare buckles and fasteners. All of it was stored in a way that prevented damage and ensured easy access. These are exactly the kinds of habits described by those who have observed his methods, and they reflect a meticulous, methodical approach rather than anything mysterious or unusual. The space also included evidence of daily life. A folded wool blanket rested on a chair. A wooden stool sat neatly in the corner, and a small radio, a practical AM unit, was present. While none of these items carried drama, they did reflect normal, sustained living. Even in isolation, Tom had constructed a space that met both functional and comfort needs, blending work and home in a single environment. Finally, the organization of the area as a whole told a larger story. There were no gaps, no signs of disruption, and no evidence of rushed activity. The notebooks, letters, and tools all showed that Tom maintained control over his environment, carefully structuring both work and storage. This reinforced a notion already evident while he lives in isolation. He is not careless or disorganized. Every element in the cabin supports a life lived deliberately, reflecting decades of experience, skill, and adaptation to the demands of wilderness living. By the time they left this section of the cabin, it was clear that these discoveries answered some of the questions raised earlier. The letters and notebooks showed that Tom maintained contact with the outside world while prioritizing independence. The tools and supplies confirmed that his work continued even in isolation. The careful organization demonstrated foresight and consistency. In short, the second major discovery was not about hidden objects or secret plans. It was about structure, preparation, and continuity. For anyone observing Tom Oar's life, the lesson was clear. Living remotely requires discipline, and the cabin was an extension of that discipline. Every shelf, every notebook, every bundle of thread served a purpose. This room, like the workshop, reinforced the portrait of a man who had built a life entirely on skill, routine, and careful attention to detail. A life shaped by experience, not by coincidence or spectacle. Stepping into the final section of the cabin, it became clear that this space was the heart of Tom Oar's daily life. Third and biggest discovery. Unlike the workshop, which reflected active crafting, or the study, which showed organization and planning, this area demonstrated how his living space was fully integrated with survival. Every shelf, every bundle, and every container was arranged for maximum efficiency, reflecting decades of experience living alone in the Montana wilderness. Along one wall, several shelves held the practical supplies necessary for both leatherworking and trapping. Bundles of tanned hides, neatly stacked and sorted by size and type, indicated preparation for future projects. Tools for shaping, stitching, and finishing leather were stored nearby. Knives, awls, and wooden stretching frames. These items were not new or elaborate. They were simple, functional, and well-used, consistent with what has been documented about Tom's craftsmanship. Everything was arranged so that work could be done quickly, efficiently, and without wasted effort. Nearby, a small rack held implements used for trap maintenance. Thin wooden stakes, metal hooks, and cordage were organized to be easily accessible. While there were no active traps set at the moment, the presence of these tools, combined with bundles of spare materials, illustrated a life built around routine preparation. Tom has long been known to maintain trap lines for furs and pelts, and these items reflected that ongoing responsibility. Even the smallest details, like neatly coiled rope or tins of preserved supplies, reinforced the careful planning necessary to sustain an off-grid lifestyle. A modest wood-burning stove occupied one corner of the room. It was not warm, but nearby stacked logs and a simple fire-starting kit indicated that it was used regularly. Alongside it sat a small wooden stool and a folded blanket, reflecting adjustments for comfort and practicality in a space where long hours could be spent working. Tom's routines clearly account for both efficiency and the demands of living in the wilderness, showing adaptation to seasonal and physical needs. Perhaps the most informative aspect of this section was how it reflected why Tom chose to live in this remote cabin in the first place. Publicly, he has stated that the Yak Valley provides the combination of isolation, access to wildlife, and opportunity for self-sufficient living that he values. The cabin is strategically located near forests and rivers, allowing him to maintain trap lines, gather supplies, and live off the land with minimal interference. Interviews and television appearances confirm that independence and solitude are central to his philosophy. He intentionally distances himself from towns and modern conveniences to maintain control over his environment. This philosophy is evident in every detail of the space. Supplies are arranged for efficiency. Workspaces are designed to reduce unnecessary movement. Seasonal tasks, such as preparing hides or maintaining gear, are planned in advance, often months ahead. The cabin itself is simple but functional, built by hand to suit the needs of its occupants. Everything is deliberate, reflecting a life designed around independence and a deep understanding of the natural cycles that govern wilderness survival. The area also contained signs of careful long-term preparation. Small containers held preserved foods and spare materials, ready to support him through the winter months. Even his notebooks and project lists, while not dramatic, demonstrated consistent planning and foresight. There was no evidence of haphazard living. Every item had a purpose, every corner was utilized effectively, and every workflow was organized to support self-sufficiency. This final section of the cabin reinforced a central theme. Tom Oar's life is a deliberate integration of craft, survival, and philosophy. He does not live remotely for show or dramatics. He does so to maintain a life of discipline, skill, and independence. His choice of location, his organizational habits, and his attention to seasonal cycles all converge to create a sustainable system that supports living entirely off-grid. The cabin is more than a home. It is a manifestation of decades of experience, careful observation, and a clear understanding of the natural environment. By the time they left this part of the cabin, the evidence was undeniable. Each tool, each bundle, each note reflected a man but fully committed to a life of self-reliance. The space demonstrated not mystery or drama, but purpose and preparation, illustrating why he has chosen this lifestyle for decades and why he continues to live in such a remote corner of Montana. The third major discovery was not a single object or secret. It was the totality of a life methodically lived, designed to endure the demands of the wilderness while maintaining independence and control over daily life. What did the discovery reveal? The final section of the cabin offers insight not only into the objects within it, but also into the life that Tom Oar continues to lead in the Yak Valley. For decades, he has chosen isolation, self-sufficiency, and close connection to the natural world. And the cabin is a clear reflection of that lifestyle. Everything inside, from tools to supplies, demonstrates a life carefully organized to support independence, craft, and survival. As of the most recent reports and interviews, Tom Oar still resides in the Yak Valley with his wife, Nancy. The couple remains largely off-grid, living in the same hand-built cabin that has been home for decades. Tom continues to maintain his trap lines, process hides, and craft leather goods, while Nancy supports daily routines and household management. Their lifestyle is consistent with the one documented in mountain men: remote, structured, and reliant on skill rather than convenience. The cabin itself reflects this ongoing routine. Workspaces are neat, tools are organized, and project areas are clearly maintained. Finished leather goods, partially completed projects, and supplies are stored methodically, ready for the next task. There is no evidence of abandonment or neglect. Every aspect of the cabin shows continued use. This attention to organization supports the demands of wilderness life, where preparedness can mean the difference between comfort and hardship, especially during Montana winters. Even small items in the cabin highlight a life of self-sufficiency. Shelves contain materials for leatherwork, spare tools for traps, and containers for preserved food. A wood-burning stove remains a primary source of heat, and stacked firewood demonstrates foresight for colder months. Seating, blankets, and work surfaces are arranged for both efficiency and comfort, reflecting adaptations for aging and long hours of manual work. Each item serves a practical purpose, aligning with a lifestyle built on preparation, skill, and routine. Tom's choice to remain in the Yaak Valley is rooted in several factors. Isolation allows him to maintain control over his environment and continue his trapping and crafting without interference. The surrounding forests and rivers provide direct access to resources necessary for survival and work. Moreover, living off-grid aligns with his philosophy of independence, personal responsibility, and living in accordance with natural cycles. Interviews with Tom emphasize that these elements are not merely convenience, but fundamental to the life he has chosen. Trapping remains a central component of his lifestyle. Tom has described his trap lines as both livelihood and tradition, requiring regular monitoring and maintenance. Supplies for these activities, traps, cordage, and baits, are stored in accessible areas of the cabin. Similarly, leatherworking continues to occupy significant space and attention. Bundles of hides, specialized tools, and partially completed projects indicate ongoing craft and adherence to skills honed over decades. These routines not only sustain a practical life, but also serve as a structure for daily living, maintaining continuity and purpose. While the cabin conveys the demands of wilderness survival, it also communicates a life of careful planning. Seasonal calendars, notes on projects, and organized materials demonstrate that Tom structures his life around environmental conditions and personal capability. He has adapted tools and workflows to accommodate aging while preserving independence. The careful arrangement of items and attention to detail reflect both foresight and respect for the challenges of remote living. Importantly, while Tom and Nancy's life is isolated, it is not disconnected. Interviews and public appearances show that they remain engaged with a broader community through occasional contact with neighbors, participation in supply trips, and interactions with the Mountain Men production team. These connections, though limited, indicate a balance between solitude and necessary engagement. The cabin remains the center of daily life, a functional hub where independence, skill, and routine converge. As of today, Tom Oar continues to live much as he has for decades. He remains in his hand-built cabin, tending his trap lines, processing hides, and crafting leather goods. He and Nancy live a deliberately structured, self-sufficient life in one of the most remote areas of Montana. There are no public reports of him leaving permanently, relocating, or abandoning the cabin. Every detail of the space, from workbench to stove to storage, reflects a man maintaining the same principles that have guided his life: independence, preparedness, and adaptation to the wilderness environment. The cabin serves as a living record, choices, skills, and values. Far from dramatic discoveries or hidden secrets, the true insight lies in the daily routines, careful organization, and deliberate lifestyle that continue to define him. Tom remains in the Yak Valley, living a life of quiet independence, skill, and self-reliance, a life entirely consistent with the principles documented over decades of observation and public reporting. The cabin is more than a home. It is a testament to a life intentionally designed for survival, craft, and freedom within the wilderness. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and click on the next video shown on your screen.